Hi, my name is Mike Gilbertson, and I'm the Ag Nonpoint Source Implementation Coordinator for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And I have a short presentation here to talk about the Wisconsin Nonpoint Source Pollution Abatement Program. Some topics I like to talk about in this short presentation is the history of the state Nonpoint Source Pollution Abatement Program. Where did it come from? What are the ag performance standards, and where did they come from? What is the describing the agency roles and responsibilities from the DNR, Department of Ag, and the County Land Conservation Departments, and also a short description on what's the elements of the NR 151 Administrative Code. What are the sections in there that make up NR 151? So to start off, the Nonpoint Runoff Management in Wisconsin, or Ag Nonpoint Source Pollution Abatement Program, started back in the 1970s as it came out of the Federal Clean Water Act that was enacted in 1972. And at that time, with the Clean Water Act, states started addressing runoff issues at the state level. In Wisconsin, that took in the form of NR 120, Natural Resources 120 Administrative Code that was called the Priority Watershed Program. So that was the beginning of Wisconsin's Nonpoint Source Pollution Abatement Program, was in the form of what was called the Priority Watershed Program. And this set the original framework that still exists today. And even though the program has changed, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but really a lot of these elements still exist, and that is that it is a multi-agency collaboration to implement our non-point source abatement program. That is with the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Ag, and the County Land Conservation Departments. The Priority Watershed Program, that in there it talks about critical sites and these areas that are significant sources of non-point source pollution, and that term significant actually still exists today in our administrative code, even throughout changes. The original non-point source pollution abatement program in Wisconsin, this Priority Watershed Program were large-scale watershed-based plans. These were large projects that had a 10-year lifespan, and it was significant resources allocated to this program. It was very successful, but it was structured around watersheds, and as successful as it was, it started to have some challenges after about 15 to 20 years into the 1990s. So into the 1990s, some of the context around the Priority Watershed Program, and this text here is actually copied directly from documents in the file that were saved when the Department of Natural Resources and Department of Ag went through the Nonpoint Source Program redesign in the late 1990s. So back then, some of the messages we heard from Governor Thompson were, there must be a better way to accomplish the goals of this program. We can't keep throwing money at the program in the process. And what this was referring to was the initial state non-point source pollution abatement program. It was called the Priority Watershed Program. These are what the terms that they were using. There's also messages that DATCAP needs to develop a nutrient management policy. DNR must set performance standards. And then the local land conservation departments must develop land and water resource management plans. So we're starting to see the structure of the land and water resource management plan development, assigning DNR as their role of setting performance standards, ag performance standards in particular to agriculture. But there's more than that, and I'll talk about that too. But also that DATCAP is sort of leading the nutrient management policy, and this structure is still there today. This took off in an Legislative Act 27 to address these concerns, and it was this committee that took the lead in developing what became NR 151. And another point that they were considering was these are maturing as agencies, that we could do this at the local level, at the county level, more efficiently. And that's a change from what the Priority Watershed Program was, which was more of a state-led program at that time. So you're starting to see this change to a more local-led implementation at the County Land Conservation Department level. So that's what was created. in the late 90s, the legislature passed or developed in statute 281-16 that prescribed the Nonpoint Source Pollution Performance Standards. It's runoff management. And that's what made up NR 151. But within 151, specific to the agricultural performance standards, this statute defines the DNR role for the Nonpoint Source Pollution Abatement Program. At what it says is that the DNR defines the what. So DNR has the job of developing rules that prescribe performance standards and prohibitions for the ag performance standards. So we define what has to be done to be in compliance. The role for DATCAP defined in statute is defining the how. So DATCAP, Department of Ag, develops rules that prescribe practices, conservation practices that when implemented will achieve compliance with the performance standards that DNR develops. And then NR 151 and in statute also defines cost share requirement for implementation. And that started the development of creation of grants that would use to cost share practices implemented on farms. And that was what was started in 1997, was the Nonpoint Source Program Redesign, and then the development of the NR 151 administrative code. It was different than the Priority Watershed Program because this was uniform in eligibility. By every county has the ability to apply for cost sharing, versus the Priority Watershed Program, being a watershed-based plan, took a watershed area, and it was so any farms within the watershed would be eligible for cost sharing, but a farm just outside of that watershed, even though in the same area, maybe facing some of the same challenges, would not be eligible for cost sharing. So there's a little bit of fairness there in terms of what farms would be eligible for some of the cost sharing, and this created more uniform eligibility based at the county level. So it created TRIM grants, targeted runoff management grants that could be used for implementing the performance standards in NR 151. This redesign also assigned implementation responsibilities to local governments, to land conservation departments at the county level. It developed staffing grants for counties to DATCAP. And this was all part of the redesign that is in the Department of Ag side, and rules that are administrative code used for Department of Ag. Like I said, it defines our agency roles, and it also defined the cost share requirements. So this was part of the redesign in the late 90s, and it started in 1997 and ultimately became promulgated into a code in 2002. So the elements of NR 151, basically this administrative code is structured within 5 different subchapters, and specific to the agricultural performance standards, that would be in subchapter 2, which is the area that I focus on. And however, NR 151 is more than just agricultural requirements. There's also performance standards for non-agricultural facilities, construction sites, those types of things, transportation facilities, and also, you know, this other section that talks about technical standards for non-agricultural type runoff issues. But, you know, specific to the area that I work in, I focus more on the first 2 subchapters of NR 151, where we work with the definitions in for terms that are used within the administrative code. So subchapter 1 has those definitions and the meaning of them, general provisions of the administrative code, and then also subchapter 2, and that's in subchapter 2 is where they define the agricultural performance standards and prohibitions. Basically, it describes what do all farms in the state have to do to be in compliance with our performance standards, so that we reduce the risk of runoff pollutants reaching waters of the state. So that's the elements of NR 151 and the basic structure. In summary, the original Nonpoint Source Pollution Abatement Program in Wisconsin was created out of the Clean Water Act in the 1970s. And that lasted about 20 years until it was redesigned, and it went through a redesign process in 1997 through around 2001, and became administrative code promulgated in 2002. And that is our current administrative code, chapter NR 151, for runoff management. Implementation of NR 151 is a multi-agency collaboration, and that the agencies collaborating for successful implementation include the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Ag, and the County Land Conservation Departments. This collaboration is defined in state statutes.